Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we are starting today Ori and the Blind Forest Definitive Edition. I looked at Ori and the Blind Forest original version, which you get for free if you buy the Definitive Edition, and I don't think you can buy the original version at all separately at this point. And while there are a few changes, for instance, this option here says cinematics instead of theater, and the obvious Definitive Edition background is slightly different in this game. It seems like they're pretty much all improvements, or at the very least exactly the same as the original version of the game. You're in a weird position compared to movies where a recut of a movie very possibly could make a movie worse, although that in itself is probably more of a myth than an actuality. Most movies get reshoots and recuts before the initial release, and if there is a secondary recut, well, we really haven't had any secondary recuts on movies in quite a while. If they're anything, they're just added scenes added back in for the Blu-ray versions, things that should have been cut out in the first place. We've never really run into that scenario in video games where I've actually played a level and said, yeah, actually this should be on the cutting room floor. I imagine that is because when in the process of developing games, things that get left on the cutting room floor are obviously not adding anything to the game. What is added here is, in the original game, you get only these cutscenes, seemingly 6 of them, one including the credits. That's in the original game, but the behind the scenes, the promotional videos, and the concept art are all new and probably slightly spoilery, so it's a little weird that they're unlocked by default, but okay. I think this game is mostly a Metroidvania game. There's also some inspiration from movies, particularly it seems the Iron Giant and what was the other movie that they said it was inspired by? I forget now. So a couple of like animated movies inspiring this. These settings here have a bug if you have high DPI turned on Windows, in which you can't actually set the resolution the way you would want to set it without going to the application and turning on compatibility mode and treating it like an application. This is the first game I have ever run into that has had this bug, and that's a bit of a problem considering this is a Microsoft Studios funded game. So there's really no good argument that a Microsoft employee couldn't tell them how to program their game properly so that it by default opts out of being using the high dots per inch resolution settings, or B, at the very least have the resolution setting work regardless of that fact. The fact that it was putting me at 720p when my monitor is at 1920 by 1080 until I turned off the high DPI doesn't even logically make sense. The only other thing I've done here is I've turned off VSync because when recording it doesn't really matter. It also seems like the sound effects here maybe have about twice as many pips, but I will have to point out that by default everything is at the maximum, so if I wanted to turn anything up, if I had particularly weak speakers and no way to preamp or post-amp the audio, you don't get that option, so your range of options are just quieter and quieter and even more quiet and even more quiet, going all the way down. So even if they did double the number of ticks that you can move left and right, that's not super useful. I think the music in the menu is going to be particularly loud compared to the rest of the game, and we'll probably at some point toggle off motion blur. Controls look the exact same, although it is worth mentioning that the right bump dash doesn't exist in the original version of the game. So another reason not really for me to ever play the original game I just can't realistically justify playing this game twice. And even if I really, really loved Ori and the Blind Forest, which lots of people did love Ori and the Blind Forest when it came out in 2015, I can't imagine with the hundreds upon hundreds of other games I have on Steam that I would, in the next 3 or 4 years, find some time that I'd want to go back and play the original just for some historic sake. There seems to be no achievements for either versions of the game. That would be one motivating factor you could have in it. By the way, the visual setting bug is in both the original and the definitive edition, so they didn't fix it. There are new difficulty settings in the definitive edition. And see, do we have anything else we need to mention before we start? I don't think so. That's quite a lot of empty slots. I don't know why you would specifically need 10 save slots, but I guess that's fine. And then there's a symbol in the bottom there. It looks like it is a click button of some sort, like you would click the left stick or the right stick, but that doesn't seem like that's doing anything. So I have no idea what that symbol is supposed to even represent. I'm playing this with an Xbox One controller. A is obviously select, X is copy, Y is delete. So what in the world is backup? It's W if you use keyboard and mouse. We can say that much. But that doesn't really look like the back button. I guess we could try it. It doesn't look like the start button. It might be the Xbox button itself. That would be insane. But I guess that might be the only option that's left, and I have tape over that button, so I'm not going to bother to press that. Alright. So now we get into our first decision. Do I want to play on normal, or do I want to play on easy and just breeze through this? This seems like it's a moderately lengthy game at about 17 hours. Maybe even a little bit longer than that, and then I have to calculate in the fact that it usually takes me about twice as long as most people, which I think I would particularly just want to go with easy. I guess the question here in the definitive edition versus the original version is you probably got one life as a new challenge mode, and you probably got hard in the definitive edition. I imagine originally it was just easy and normal, or there was no difficulty setting at all and everything was normal. But yeah, I'm gonna go with easy just because I like the stories more, and I want to be able to focus on criticizing the game instead of having to button mash. We shall always remember the night when I lost Ori to the Great Storm. I have no idea what the story is to this game. I've managed to be blissfully ignorant, even though I've heard lots of people sing its praises. I mostly like know that much and nothing else. And probably by the time I play this game, I'll be perfectly positioned to start thinking about potentially buying the sequel Will of Wisps and playing that, unless of course I find out I don't like this game, which would be weird, but not possible. That looks very nicely animated, but this big fat character, which, ooh, that sensitivity there seems a little high. Like the way his stomach just swings around as if it has no weight to it in itself, or no connectivity. I don't think this character would be an interesting character to play as. But guess it would also be interesting if they did make me play as a big round fat creature. And you can go to the left, but you just look upward when you do it. And then when you look up, press up on the left stick, you actually look to the left. Interesting way to go there. Yeah. Jumping is really really slow. So I feel like either my body is going to transform significantly, or this is not the character we're going to play as. We're going to Swallow's Nest, I guess, or we're in Swallow's Nest. I guess I could mispronounce the game. Here's a tutorial to make sure we know how to press A to jump, and I would assume that if we just stood here long enough without jumping first, the game might pop up a tutorial message. We've got some nice foliage, a lot of nice animation here. Yeah, I could mispronounce this and call it Ori in the blind forest, which the Ori were when Naru embraced my light. That's a sweet, kind start of a story. As a child of her own. So I guess this light little creature here is doing the deep voice sounds. Yeah, the Ori were a bad guy in the Stargate TV series. So I've never heard anybody pronounce it or anything other than Ori. Which definitely gives the feeling of like a Japanese word or an Asian word at least, and I don't know if this really was made by a Japanese company or developer or artist, more than it was just maybe very inspired by it. So this character, while small, does seem more reasonable to move. Perhaps if you swapped between the two characters, you'd have one who's more of a brawler and capable of doing more physical things, and then one light character who could crawl in the small areas and move faster. So we jumped up and he grabbed us, and then he put an X on the tree. So apparently the trees only fruit once for the lifetime of the X on the tree. And I guess now we are controlling both, and I'm not really sure which direction the game really wants us to go. I guess it probably wants us to do the standard video game thing and go to the right. But yeah, you can definitely see that's much slower of a process. And I don't think we have any other buttons right now. Again, I said though that this game I don't think has achievements, so I'm mostly goofing around in the thought that there might be some interesting Easter egg. This feels very cartoony, and I certainly could go on a rant, but I'll try to avoid it. As far as the quality of cartoons these days, they tend to be extremely poorly animated, extremely cheaply done, extremely targeted and marketed using kind of the same themes and the same hard edge towards like teenage boys targeting for the most part. You really wouldn't get something that's just sweet and simple coming out in a cartoon on streaming services or TV these days that look like this, whereas this would probably catch a lot of people's eyes just by the higher animation. Instead you'll get things more like Ben 10. Not that there's really anything wrong with Ben 10 even, I'd just say. So am I supposed to jump on this? I guess I am. And the tree definitely shook when I did that. Sometimes I see games where it feels like the entirety of all the cutscenes could have been a soft pitch for some animated direct-to-TV or direct-to-DVD movie. And certainly you can have a bit of a risk here in that we have been given an extremely small amount of gameplay so far. It feels like it might be slightly inspired by I don't want to say, not Princess Mononoke, and not Spirited Away, although it does have a little bit of Spirited Away. Yeah, it feels like it's inspired by, it's a lot like My Neighbor Totoro, which again would be an animated movie that particularly Western animators would not do these days. So these fruits seem to glow. It seems like I'm supposed to wander off and get split up. The general idea here on that fateful night is what it said. I imagine is we're going to have a motivating factor to stop these two from just being best friends in their little forest together. And they did kind of explain how throughout the game we'll probably see constructed platforms. So I'm just going to wander off and I imagine end up in some alternate forest. When I lit the skies ablaze, I called out to Ori. So we can see these trees have grown up more. There's vines on them, and the scratches on them are the same. So it does seem like either his system is really, really bad, or the trees only fruit once in a very long time. I don't know if you wouldn't have told the story better as more of an automated thing. Instead of making me actually walk. So the sky lit up. I don't know if it really was the small guy's fault. And then they went and hid in the cave. There clearly is, at least in the case, hope never came. It's clearly a case of this guy being part darkness and part light. Like his face is light, but the rest of his body is dark and purple. Kind of feels like he might be a giant bird that's lost his feathers and is too large to fly. And you also have like a Native American dream catcher hanging in the top of the cave. So that's slightly interesting. So they ate all their food and they're scared. And it looks like what really probably happened was an asteroid hit and it caused a giant fire and killing all the plants. Through the passage of time, that went blurry. That's a good argument to turn off motion blur right there. I'm not pressing any buttons now. Life withered and decayed. I kind of assume that these guys are really, really old creatures. Potentially live forever. Even their picture on the rocks is starting to fade off. When the forest was blind. It's an interesting way to describe a forest as blind. So it almost seems like the motivating factor of this game will be to run through the story and find a way to bring life back to the forest, and that they're almost like some forest nymphs or forest creatures. Still hope shaded its face. I don't know if this deep voice is better than just doing a character, just having a voiceover, or kind of doing nothing. Now the small guy is carrying food to the big guy, and I guess the big guy is going to be dead because we're seeing ghosts and memories, which would leave us playing as just the small guy. But if he's dead, then is there some way to bring him back to life? Because we really haven't seen any of that. Now in the foreground we're seeing a spider crawl. That was slightly creepy. So we went from this point where the foreground was easily ignored and I wasn't even paying attention to it, to all of a sudden we walked to this point and a spider crawled in the foreground, which is a nice establishment of at least some other kind of life in this forest instead of just these two creatures. But yeah, so far this feels more like an interactive cartoon than an actual game. And it's been a while. It's probably been 5 minutes at least just to do this tutorial section. He's gonna walk in here and things are even more decayed. And it took control away from me to do some smoother animation cutscene, in-game cutscenes. I probably am gonna compare this game a lot to Dust and Elysian Tale, which is also a Metroidvania platformer beat 'em up game, and we'll see if this is a Metroidvania platformer beat 'em up game or not. But once we actually get into gameplay, yeah, clearly he's dead. But I will say, there was a big guy and there was a small guy in Dust and Elysian Tale, and they just gave the character you played as, the big guy, amnesia and put you on a quest very, very fast. An orphan once more, it says. So you were fairly quickly within 3 minutes playing the game, and then because of the obviously cliched mechanic of using amnesia, they could reveal more backstory as you're playing instead of doing an entire act here. I mean, this really can't even be called a scene. This is a prelude act as far as I'm concerned. Now either the camera is zoomed in more, and I don't think you could really play a game with the camera this zoomed in, and yeah, I guess that's the case. Searching for my light, he just tripped, which is an interesting animation, and then kind of took control away from me. I'm walking incredibly slow now to emphasize sadness. Kind of feels like the character might be growing a little bit too, into almost like a flying dragon. So weak and so frail. Again, I'm not hitting any buttons to grasp onto the wood. That happened automatically. I did hit left to climb up, and then I hit left a second time to climb up again, and then a third time to climb up again. It's almost like quick time events. And cries were met with silence. It'd be weird if this was a creepy horror game where you were in a nearly empty, spooky forest, because that's definitely not what's being depicted. Although you could pretty effectively set somebody up for a horror story by establishing it as a cartoony, kid-friendly looking game and then subverting expectations. I hope went astray. Walking through vines. Like every little left is animating differently. The amount of time you would have had to spend to animate each of this when my child's strength faltered. So apparently the person that's talking is not the character we're playing as. Yeah, I don't think most video game programmers should or could do this level of animation and make a video game on top of that. Although Microsoft Studios probably funded a lot of this, so maybe that's why it's so pretty. But almost certainly throughout the gameplay, we're not going to crawl on the ground and pass out. And the last breath was drawn. You kind of have to assume that once we get out of this prelude section, we will play much more generically with the animations. They'll be running and jumping and things like that you'd see in an average game, but it will in no way be as animated as what we're seeing right now. And yeah, we're seeing a bunch of lights light up, which I guess maybe his life led. My life revived Ori and a new age dawned. My life or Ori's life? Or this character's life? Alright, so now we have it zoomed out like a real video game, and we're bouncing back with backwards and forwards like a video game beat 'em up game would probably move. Although in all fairness, even this is a little too much bouncing and back. Yeah, A is kind of blurry. We can go over here. And that's the way we were going before. Yeah. We are moving very fast. We now actually hurt ourselves when we touch those red vines. Okay. There's no crawling, it seems. Let's just hit all the buttons. A is jump, X, Y, Z. Right bump is not dashing right now. It's a rather floaty thing. You do have kind of an interesting ledge grab animation there, but it doesn't actually help you. And then there's almost like a pole vault animation that it did there. Yeah, it seems like if you hold A, you get potentially a backflip. Very acrobatic. Left trigger, right trigger not doing anything, right stick not doing anything. D-pad seems to be the same as the left stick. It'll be questionable, I guess, what on like their hard modes, how tight the controls really have to be. Alright, so this is weird. It says hold A to jump higher, which I guess is to just prove that, yeah, if you had pressed A, that wouldn't have worked. But if you hold A, that'll work. Gonna have to be careful. Ooh, I only have like one more health here. So yeah, that's probably not something I can actually deal with. So I'd probably have to walk this way. Hold down on the left stick, I guess, is what that's supposed to do. This is really bad icons. Like, why not use the D-pad icons and press A to jump down on platforms? So I'm going to hit D-pad down and press A and you jump down. That would be much more understandable than showing me a stick. Like here, I'll hold down on the right stick and press A. Doesn't do anything. But if I hold down on the left stick and press A, it does do something. That's something. We found a small spirit light container. Spirit light has been added to your meter, which is down in the middle. Find more spirit lights to quickly gain ability points. Alright. So this does feel like a Metroidvania platformer to me so far. And I guess falling to your death probably isn't going to hurt you. I think I'm going to kind of quickly determine that I would be best to not die, and I was very right to not try and play this on one hit. Okay, hitting that is a life shard. So those colors seem to be good. But we don't have any attacks, so I'm hitting a lot of buttons here. Trying to see if there would be a grab or something. And yeah, once we get that dash ability, I do think we'll be in a nice position. Found an energy cell. You can now collect and use more energy. Remember to use energy to create soul link and save your game. Hold B to create soul link and save your game. Okay. So how is that different in one death mode though? I guess these are just lights. Okay. So what was I supposed to do over here? I guess that was what I was supposed to do. So we now got some more spirit light. And we've got an energy shard. That was a very quick, I suppose, tutorial boss battle. Not too bad there. Let's see. So we want to crawl under here and find one more. Yeah, we've got an ability point. We gain an ability point, create a soul link, tap B. Don't hit hold B. Alright, so holding B and tapping B does something different. So we could get most pickups now float to Ori, which would be kind of effective. Allows reusing soul links and shortens the cooldown timer. Or quick flame allows you to shoot flames before recharging. So you have an aggressive path here on these curls of what seems almost like a three-tailed creature. Let's see. Which we're not really sure how much actual fighting is going to be necessary. You almost have to assume that you don't need to get the ultimate split flame because other people will be going to these other paths, which is middle path would be makes most pickups show up on the map. Life pickups will restore twice as much life. Most pickups automatically be absorbed. Energy pickups reward 50% more energy, which probably makes it then easier to get this kind of experience. But maybe that's not what that means. Ability cells show up on the map. Increase the spirit light gained from absorbed spirit light. So your first move clearly is you've just got to fill out this path to get more spirit light so that you can then fill out any other path. Unless it turns out that even if you did fill out this entire path on this ability tree, you still wouldn't have enough energy throughout the entirety of the game. If that is the case, you don't know that when you first start playing. So there's kind of no choice here. Otherwise, we'd go down this path, which there's an air dash ability, which probably we will need to get at some point to get collectibles, and we're going to have to just jump backwards. But it seems like we'll eventually just get the default dash ability for free. And I would suspect in the definitive edition, some, if not all, of the abilities on this tree, on this line, didn't exist. I wouldn't be surprised if very few, if none of these abilities existed in the original game. But yeah, we want to go this way, which to get this will require ability markers, which requires energy efficiency, which requires ultra spirit magnet, which requires life efficiency, which requires that, which requires that. So you do have to just go down the path. So instead of it saying you require something else, it would have been easier if it just said requires all previous abilities in chain on every single option, unless there happens to be something around here that you could skip. I don't think that's the case though. Like, I guess he was possibly thinking he was gonna do something different. Deep in the forest, Ori found what was lost. Press X to pick up the tiny light. We're back into a more slow, cartoony animation style. So I guess we're gonna get these tiny bits of light, and they're gonna give some kind of idea that will restore the friends. My strength is returning. I am seeing the light in the eyes of the spirit tree. Okay. I was lost in this glen when she loosened her grip. I can guide you on your journey if you allow me. This is the point where Dust and Elysian Tale started. You were playing as a creature. You were given a Navi-like creature who was going to send you on the journey. But be still. Can you hear that? They must have followed you here. What did it say? It said X to attack, I guess is what it said. So it's, I guess that's your only real attack ability, is to get somewhere close to it and hit X for the moment. The lights shall return to me. These words the spirit tree once said. In the glade past the cavern, we'll find him. There's a path up ahead. So we got 18% of the sunken grove, or whatever that was. Let's see. Can we go back? Find the new spirit tree. How do we get to the map? We've got a map here, and we need to go there at some point. And let's see. Skills. We've got some other skills here. And we've got a timer. I think that was added in Definitive Edition, and kind of a collection of things. And we can't adjust any settings on the fly. Yeah. I'm just gonna tap every button just to see if a tap does something different. So I think what they did, what they wanted to establish there, says press this to view the map, and we're supposed to find the spirit tree in Hollow Grove, which I guess maybe. Alright, so hitting the plants does return some experience to you. Good to know. And these plants also now. It kind of feels weird though that we're at odds and fighting the forest ourselves. Ooh. So you're gonna have to be a little bit more careful than you normally would be in a game like this. Like, it feels a little bit more like a challenge than I would have expected. And that couldn't be a good thing, or it might just be a really bad thing when you consider the way this looks. There is something to be said about if a game looks cartoony and kid-friendly, it should play kind of cartoony and kid-friendly, at least on easy mode. And I've run into several games that really don't have that feeling. And yeah, we also have an issue where you're not really allowed to save as much as you would like, and these guys do seem to attack you as much as yeah, seems like I'm gonna have to have a double jump to attack that, and I'm not sure if that really matters too much. Hold the jump even higher. Gain an ability point. Control, create a soul link and tap nearby. Spirit wells are ancient structures that were used to quickly traverse all of Nibel. The light of spirit wells will replenish your strength whenever you're weary. So, we'll soul link, and then seems like we're going to be very quickly able to use that. And it seems like things are going to be marked fairly off perfectly. Press X to save your game and Y to warp. So game saved, and then can we wipe? Warp? Nope. So we'll have to do more once we have a double jump. That's fairly obvious. So I guess we end the episode here. We're at 20% of Sunken Glades. I wouldn't be surprised if there's about a dozen areas, and I wouldn't be surprised if these areas are fairly large. Yeah, I figured out how to zoom. Alright, good. So it kind of feels like all the areas connect through this central tree location, and by the looks of it, I'm seeing probably 9 areas, which I suspect is 9 bosses. Let's see. I imagine all the areas are going to be slightly larger than that. We see 6 world events, so there might only be like 6 locations. If we look at the collectibles, we see 12 and 15 numbers, so it feels very possible that there's somewhere between 12 and 15 collectibles. I doubt there's 33 levels with 1 collectible each. We've got skills that are locked, so we won't really know what they are, but I imagine these are skills that we unlock throughout the process of the game, which also implies we're going to beat a decent number of enemies to probably unlock these skills too. That's looking like potentially another 10 items, another 10 bosses in total. So, yeah. I can definitely see how this game would just get longer and longer as the levels get bigger and bigger, which is not particularly a bad thing. So, I think we've been going long enough. It was a very slow start, as it often is for the first episode of a series, but particularly in this case with the cutesy animation. Again, I'm not 100% sold on the sound effects versus paying voice actors. It does stop you from having to really localize a game instead of trying to translate all the text into other people's languages. But it also creates a scenario where if you're using any voice actors at all to make those sounds, the sounds just sound weird. And I've never really heard anybody do it well with animal-like creatures. So it whatever Ori is that we're playing as, it looks kind of like a fox spirit. It doesn't really sound like a fox is barking, and foxes bark kind of like dogs bark. So it would be closer to a dog voice or dog sounds versus anything else in my mind. But I think just having them speak English and not bothering to localize to any other language still is a perfectly acceptable way to do things, and it would open up this game back to feeling like it's for kids. Although, so far from what I've seen in the gameplay and the way you have to manually save, which is a very old concept that has long since been abandoned for the checkpoint systems that nearly every other game has, this does feel like it's a little too difficult, even on easy, for kids that aren't fairly good at games. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend or follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below in the description box. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and gift me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.